This brings me to Sharia, the Islamic government. From this series, we already know that the Quran is closer to Dante's Divine Comedy than a constitution, which doesn't change the fact that a lot of people still think that the Quran is a law book, a constitution, so to speak, which is beyond any reason. But before I can address the topic, there is another topic I first have to speak about, which is the role of the caliph. Especially Western viewers like to portray the caliph equivalent to a pope, which just makes no sense. Contrary to Christianity, there is no religious authority in Sunni Islam. An imam is just another human being that is being sought advice of because he reads more about the religion. It's like having a math question, so you go to someone that knows math better without the person you go to becoming your mentor or your supervisor in life. It just makes no sense. So why are so many people following imams in various areas in the world? Because they want to, not because they have to. That being said, the most ridiculous comparison is putting the caliph equal to a pope. The Catholic Pope can literally redefine the religion. He can abolish hell, which happened in the past. He can determine what is a sin and what can be viewed differently. Caliph, on the other hand, can do nothing. The word caliph is of Arabic origin and just means leader. Your president in a democracy is your caliph. However, we know that through history, the word caliph was associated of being the leader of the Islamic world. And yes, that's supposed to be the case, but you can just imagine caliph being equivalent to the European title of emperor. There were many emperors, but none actually ruled over all other kings, which the title emperor is implying. Now let's get to Sharia. First things first, the Sharia is divided into two parts. One in regards to the individual, which has nothing to do with the state. For instance, you're supposed to pray 5 times a day, which is supposed to happen according to Sharia, but the state itself has no right to enforce it on you. This is specifically stated in Surah 9:5. The author does include any type of piece of clothes that is being used to cover yourself in this. The second part is about the state itself and specifically and only for Muslims. There are of course also requirements and a frame in which the Sharia is supposed to exist. First, the leader has to have the consent of the majority. This is based on Surah/verse 42-38. This is also further mentioned by Umar Rasulullah, who said, "Whoever pledges allegiance to anyone without the collective consent of the Muslims presents himself for the death sentence." Second, all Muslim citizens have to be equal, including the leader. Third, Sharia is supposed to concern itself only with subjects like marriage, divorce, distribution of inheritance, and similar matters. So Sharia alone is not enough to fill a quarter of a constitution. Specifically, the rights that are reserved for estates are usurpation of wealth, meaning guaranteeing wealth of the people, national assets, meaning stuff that doesn't belong to anyone, belongs to the state, documentation and evidence, example, financial transactions, and distribution of inheritance, as well as previously mentioned things which are part of documentation and evidence. Fourth, the government is also supposed to organize Friday prayers. Fifth, the death penalty can only be given in 2 cases: murder and spreading of anarchy, aka terrorism rebellions. Sixth, a punishment can only be conducted when there is no doubt. The Prophet specifically said, "Do not enforce a hard punishment if there is doubt," as well as refrain from enforcing hudud as it is possible for you, as well as withdraw hudud wherever you can find a plea. And lastly, a punishment cannot be given to non-Muslims or Muslims by birth who lack awareness of their religion akin to non-Muslims. That being said, there are 3 topics that I would have to talk about in light of the Sharia, which are first, drinking alcohol, second, apostasy, third, capital punishment. In regards to one, drinking alcohol was never punished through prohibition. Drinking alcohol was punished by 8 lashes. Abu Bakr Rasulullah later increased this to 40 lashes, and Umar Rasulullah again increased it to 80 lashes, because Muslims didn't stop drinking alcohol. So this makes it evident that drinking alcohol is not part of the Sharia in regards to the state, and as such are left to the community itself to decide. In regards to 2, the idea of punishing apostasy by death is related to the hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas Rasulullah, "Execute the person who changes his faith." However, this is out of the historic context. This was specifically meant for people during the time of the Prophet who refused the Prophet or joined the Muslim community in order to spy on the Muslims for the polytheists or gain other advantages just to leave the Muslim community the next opportunity. This is not a general call. In regards to 3, I already mentioned 2 cases, anarchy and murder. There's not a single other case where the Quran or any hadith would support the idea that capital punishment is legal in other matters. And this is pretty much all there is to Sharia, more or less. It's not about enforcing a dress code, it's not about crowning the leader to be a superior human, it's not about banning stuff that is fun, it's not about enforcing non-Muslims to be inferior to Muslims. It's extremely tame and thin and applied by Western countries anyways for the most part, except for the death penalty. For instance, it's common occurrence that the government takes care of inheritance, or marriage, or divorce. There are obviously different views in Islam than in the postmodern culture in regards to these topics, but at the end of the day, it's not wrong to claim that Germany is enforcing most of Islamic Sharia, which sounds bizarre, but that's the case. Before people go, yeah, but Sharia means theocracy, monarchy. No, it doesn't. Aside from having the majority consent, there's no government type enforced on the Muslim community. A democracy comes as close to the ideal type of government in the Sharia as it gets. Alternatively, we could also argue for an elective monarchy, with the monarch being equal in status to his citizen, but that's about it. I would like to end this part of the video with Muhammad Ali Jinnah's words, the founding father of Pakistan, so to speak. You're free. You're free to go to your temples. You're free to go to your mosque or to any other place of worship in the state of Pakistan. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state. We're starting with the fundamental principle that we're all citizens and equal citizens of one state. Now I think we should keep that in front of us, our ideal, and you will find that in the course of time, Hindus would cease to be Hindus and Muslims would cease to be Muslims. Not in the religious sense, because that is the personal belief of each individual, but in a political sense, as citizen of the state. Let's continue with Islam and other religions. This is another big topic that is controversial for ex-Muslims, and the reason to say that they abandoned the religion because apparently Islam doesn't believe in equality among humans. Believers, let's not make fun of another man who may perhaps be better than himself, and let no woman make fun of another woman who may perhaps be better than herself. Also 49:13, 49:11. Questions like, can Muslims befriend non-Muslims, with answers referring to 3:28, 4:144, 5:51, or are Muslims superior, with a reference to a hadith narrated by Shu'aib ibn Muhammad, or can Muslims greet non-Muslims, with references to a hadith by Abu Huraira, as well as similar questions like, are Muslims allowed to ask for forgiveness from non-Muslims, and are Muslims allowed to imitate non-Muslims, are all answered in a negative light and can all be answered correctly and together if the historic context is given. As mentioned, the Quran is more of a collection of historic events narrated down by the Prophet, making it closer to the Divine Comedy than a law book. And just like the Divine Comedy, references and historic context has to be understood. So what is the historic context to all of this? Basically, after the Muslims migrated to Medina, and when the polytheists gathered an army to wipe out the Muslims, non-Muslim communities started abandoning the Muslim community or aiding the polytheists. As a result of this betrayal, the Prophet said that the Muslim community should double down on this betrayal and isolate themselves further from the respective communities. The Prophet was sure that the Muslims would come out victorious, and as such, other communities would not have any leverage in saying that they are like the Muslims, or that they were friends all along, or that they aided the Muslims in other way, which did not happen anyways. This part of the Quran is a reference to Jewish and Christian communities around the area of Mecca and Medina, not a reference to all Christians and Jews. These verses were also not revealed before the Muslim dominated the Arabic Peninsula, but prior, when they were still a minority themselves. Interesting to note is also the fact that Islamic conquest through the Middle East, Persia and Northern Africa was marked with friendly ties to non-Muslims. More often than not, sieges were accompanied with locals showing the Muslim invaders secret passages with which the Muslims could enter the besieging cities. The Arabs were not just welcomed as benevolent rulers that minded their own business, they literally did mind their own business by founding their very own cities, leaving existing political structure intact. For example, prior to the Islamic invasion of Egypt, the local Egyptian church was oppressed by the Roman authority from Constantinople. The Islamic conquest allowed them complete religious freedom and autonomy to the point that the Muslims didn't even bother settling inside the prosperous cities. Instead, the city of Cairo was founded. There are multiple such cities across the mentioned regions, some of which still exist and are quite significant. Either way, this is for instance the reason why Egypt was, even after centuries, still a mainly Christian region. Even the Zoroastrians in Persia were pretty much ignored. Their religion was not exterminated by Muslims, but by the Mongol invasion that leveled entire cities and plundered all temples. Even if there were some remaining, the next invasion by Tamerlane was equally destructive to Persia. Now, after all of this, there's one big topic left. What is the main point of the religion? Why pray? Why fast? Surely an almighty being doesn't require your or my punny prayers. And yes, an almighty being does not require your or my prayers, which is why praying is not meant for God, but for you. It is for you so you can structure your day better. It is for you so you humble yourself. It is for you so you purify your soul. A Muslim is ought to have the following characteristic: being humble, being patient, being forgiving, being full of empathy and sympathy, being on the path of justice even if it hurts your own interests, being trustworthy, being altruistic, being stoic, being respectful to all, being helpful to everyone, to the weak, to the ones in need, to your surrounding, to your neighbor. And if you are a preacher, you also ought to live according to the words you're preaching. You ought to know how to speak in the way and the period of time you exist. You ought to know more than just Islam, but also Christianity, Judaism, and even philosophy. As a Muslim, you ought to remind yourself of the values you're supposed to live accordingly. You're not supposed to be a missionary. So keep reminding, you're only one who reminds, you're not one to enforce your message upon others. A Muslim community is supposed to be connected. It is supposed to be supportive. Muslims are not supposed to talk behind other people's back or humiliate other people by publicly pointing out the person's mistake. A Muslim is supposed to privately communicate with other Muslims about the faults they have. Is all of this happening? Are Muslims in general living according to the virtues that are being preached? No, clearly not. You just need one look at the Islamic world and you know it is a shit show, a circus through and through. Frankly speaking, these virtues are reached by the least, if not by none at all. However, it is not the result that counts, but your efforts on the journey to these virtues. In the end, God will decide whether you did what you could. However, and that is the point, seeking these virtues, purifying yourself, becoming the better version of yourself by being more good, is the entire point of the religion. My friends, you cannot guide whomever you please. It is God who guides whom He pleases, and He best knows those who are guided. Thank you for listening.